1 week ago, tens of thousands of anti-Shia protesters took to the streets of the biggest city of Pakistan, which is Karachi, for the second time, calling for 4 particular demands. Number 1, that all Shia population of Pakistan, the Shia Muslims, be labeled as infidels, as kafirs. Secondly, all Shia rituals and processions in the country should be banned. Thirdly, Pakistan should be declared a Sunni state. And lastly, Namuse Ashab-e Rasul should be declared as blasphemy. So in this context, I welcome you to the 46th session of the KIPS Distance Learning Program Current Affairs Newspaper Roundup session. Today we're going to discuss what are the repercussions of the rising sectarian tensions in Pakistan and how to avoid them and what steps are needed. So as far as these demands are concerned and these recent spikes in sectarian tensions and the following mass street movement by certain proscribed organizations and certain schools of thought in Pakistan were basically incited after 2 particular events. The first event was basically a speech by a Shia cleric which was found to be offensive by the Sunni community to the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And as a result of that, he not only apologized, but he actually ran out of the country in danger for his life. And then secondly, the second incident that sparked this violent sort of behavior and reaction was the airing of Ziyarat-e-Ashur on the day of Ashura, which raised an outcry among the Sunni clerics, which actually has been done for nearly more than 700 years in the subcontinent by the Shia community every year during the month of Ramadan, and there wasn't anything controversial about it before. But suddenly, some clerics with perhaps vested interests thought that they could use this opportunity to gain a lot of street power and momentum. So if we look at the history of sectarianism in Pakistan, it actually has a relatively strong history going back to the early 80s and the Islamization policies of Zia and the consequent, subsequent actually ongoing Mujahideen-led Afghan jihad across the border. So we have to understand that this jihad was a very, status quo changing reality in the subcontinent, in Pakistan in particular, in this region in general, and it really did bring a lot of changes in the mindsets of the people, in the social relations of Pakistan and other states in the region. So primarily that was the time of the emergence of the more augmentation of the competition for regional supremacy and leadership of the Muslim world between the newly emerged Islamic Republic of Iran and the already established leader in the Muslim world, that being Saudi Arabia. And that basically conflict, or the Cold War, is still going on right now to date and has divided the Muslim world along sectarian lines and has caused much disunity, much fractions and much mayhem within the Muslim world. And the sectarian conflict and the sectarian tensions in Pakistan should also be viewed under that lens, because both of these countries invested into raising sectarian proxies within Pakistan by funding sectarian minded clerics and madrasas all over Pakistan in an attempt to raise their thought aligned militant force in Pakistan. And to a large extent, Saudi Arabia was successful in doing that. Iran wasn't so successful in that respect, primarily because Pakistan is a Sunni majority state, and at the time only roughly 15% of the Pakistani population was actually Shia. So moving on, when talking about the current situation, I think it's important to know that these sentiments have been used in the past by certain parochial interested clerics and religious minded politicians in the past as well, to gain attention and to gain popularity for their political movement or for their religious movement at the cost of social solidarity and inter-sect harmony. So the slogans calling Shia Kafir were basically raised by, it was raised as a mandate, as a policy by the organization that was running the march. Now, it is understandable that sentiments were hurt on both sides by the things that were said, which should not have been said. But at the same time, there are many better ways to approach such a problem. The prevention of any offensive or hateful speeches, instead of having an angry and sectarian street show calling the entire Shia population, which by the way is 20% of Pakistan's population today, which means 40 million people, as kafir and second-class citizens. And more than nearly 250,000 or 2.5 lakh people came onto the streets in mass mobilization for this one agenda, which is a deep cause for concern for everyone, including our state, our politicians, and our institutions. Because this shows the extent of the power of hatred that Pakistan has, that people have in Pakistan. So if these people are allowed to increase their street power, flex their muscle, gain more and more momentum, and perhaps one day even enter the halls of our assemblies, there would be deep trouble for Pakistan's already precarious sectarian peace and interfaith harmony. So it's important to see that this hatred, intersect disharmony has already resulted in murder of many Shia people. Especially in recent days, there have been reports of targeted killings of Shia people in Islamabad, with one report being of a Shia man being killed while he was performing the daily prayer. Now this is absolutely brutal and cannot be excused in any civilized society. Apparently we are not a very civilized society in that respect. So if we look at the history of anger and hatred, anger has a history of leading to violence, and the government in this respect must take this issue very seriously. But despite the seriousness of this matter, we have seen that the politician and the media have generally kept silent on this issue. Now, and no serious debate has been done in our parliaments, in our National Assembly either. And there is literally not even lip service paid to this problem. And this is very problematic in the context of social harmony in the future of Pakistan. The politicians have largely remained silent and refused to, pay any lip service to this, because whenever these issues are raised, because of the sensitive nature of these issues, it leads to a lot of emotional responses, emotional slow glaring, which once again lead to basically more intersect disharmony and tensions, which is something that no politician wants to take upon himself or herself as a burden, which is why everyone basically avoids talking about this issue. But the fact of the matter is that if we want to reach a place where there is significant intersect harmony, and these instances and these events do not occur, we need to have consistent and serious debate about these issues in our society. The politicians and the medias need to take a strong, firm stance on this issue, a principled stance, which says that incitement of hatred and violence must be discouraged at all costs. It will not be tolerated, and it will be penalized when it leads to any kind of untoward events. And that should be irrespective of who is engaged in that, whether that be Sunnis or Shias or Ahmadis or Ismailis or Christians or Hindus, because the fate of a democratic nation squarely depends on its treatment of its minority. The sad matter of the fact is that despite Shias being Muslims under every definition of the Islamic law, they have been categorized as a minority in a Muslim country. This is certainly not what Quaid-e-Azam envisioned as a future country. But anyhow, 23,000 Shias have been killed over the past 40 years, ever since sectarian violence started in Pakistan. Thank you very much, Ziaul Haq. And in more than 2,000 events of violence, and the majority of these have been targeted against the very oppressed Hazara Shia community of Quetta and its outskirts. And the reason is because they can be easily identified because they look a little different than the Balochis and the rest of the people, and that has meant their bane. So it is important to see why these recent events have basically, especially in the recent context and the recent protests, isolated the Shia community and disgruntled them with the state of affairs in Pakistan. And if this huge part of Pakistan's population loses its trust and hope in the country, that would be a great loss and very damaging to the future of unity of this country. So concerted, serious efforts are the need of the hour if we need to move beyond religious debates and violence in the name of religion, because essentially that is what we've been seeing in the past 20 years in Pakistan. Religion has mostly been used for violence, for divisions, for sectarianism, and not for unity, for peace, for solidarity, and for social welfare, which was the actual purpose of the revelation that came onto Muhammad, peace be upon him. So how can this issue be addressed? Well, first of all, we need to establish a safe space where dialogue between the sect can happen without any untoward consequences or violence or anger or hatred coming out of that. So secondly, we need to establish important common grounds between different sects and sharing of ideas on neutral and hate-free environment. And this needs to be done above all other platforms in our educational institutes, where the next generation can develop more empathy and more sincerity towards their other brothers, towards their other Muslim brothers, basically. So, and this needs to be done, on a national level, lest sectarianism engulfs the entire country in flames. We have seen what has happened in Syria and Iraq, and we are witnessing what is happening in Yemen right now. Before such fate awaits Pakistan, things need to change, or many people, I fear, will undergo the same kinds of horrors that the Yemeni, Syrian and Iraqi people have gone in the last 20 years of this 21st century. Clearly, the Muslim world has not come into the 21st century yet. We are stuck in the medieval ages that the Europeans were during that time. We need to take a leap of faith and build unity, harmony in the Muslim world if we need to progress collectively and perhaps fulfill some of the basic requirement of being an ummah.